Hi everyone, this is James Seabright doing the Thursday online King's Head skills session. Sorry we're starting slightly late. Technology is a wonderful thing. I'm the board of trustees of the King's Head, as well as being an independent commercial theatre producer. And as you can see from the background, I, like so many people at the moment, I'm working from home as we work out what is happening in these unprecedented times of theatres and many other businesses being unable to operate in the way that they normally do. So here I am as part of this wonderful King's Head online initiative to do this skills session. I have done quite a few of these in the past with members of the King's Head team, and I always find them a very valuable part of both understanding how the King's Head is doing what it does, and also as part of my own kind of professional development and hearing about what the staff and the artists who've been developed through the King's Head's various programs are doing, and what their outlook is on the way that the industry is going. So I'll just talk a little bit about myself as a producer, what I do, and also my role as a trustee of the King's Head. And if you want to ask me anything or want me to talk about anything, then please feel free to comment. I'm on Instagram and Facebook Live at the same time, so I'll be trying to take stuff from both feeds, and thank you for joining. So I'm James. I have been producing for about 20 years now. I graduated in 2001, went straight into developing my own professional shows. About 10 years ago, I had a book published by Nick Hern Books, which is about being a theatre producer. It's called So You Want to Be a Theatre Producer. And writing that book was a great experience for me in terms of actually putting down in words what it is that I consider to be a producer, what they do, what the purpose of the role is. And I've also enjoyed talking about that in the years since, and in fact we released an updated version of the book a few years ago, in which we explored some of the updates, and no doubt when we get around to the third edition there'll be some big learnings from what we're going through at the moment in terms of the challenges for the industry, with weeks and months stretching out ahead potentially of there not being any live audiences enjoying theatre in the way that we're used to. So my start was at university. I got into producing when I was at uni. I was very lucky to have lots of opportunities to put on shows of all sorts, ranging from musicals, plays, new things, revivals, and one of the kind of solidifying experiences for me of that time was the experience of taking one of our shows out on tour internationally, and that experience of taking a group of fellow students out on the road, and being involved in the producing and organisational side of that was something that was a big part of what made me want to go into producing, and fast forward 15 years, and I was lucky enough to be asked by Adam Spreadbury-Mayer, the artistic director of the King's Head, to join the board as chair. In the interim time, I was building up my company, which is Seabright Productions, and we have worked with the King's Head on various things over the years, including Showstopper, the improvised musical, which was a production that I general managed and produced for about 10 years. My original involvement with that was kicked off by seeing it at the King's Head in 2008, and I've been working on it I worked on it for 10 years from 2009, which culminated in the show having a West End season, which won an Olivier Award. So I've seen that process where things that start small at venues like the King's Head have the potential to grow and become more commercial pieces and have longer lives. Another show which I've worked on from the King's Head was Trainspotting, which is the adaptation of the Evan Welsh novel, which is in collaboration with In Your Face Theatre, Greg Esplin's company from Scotland. The King's Head developed a version of Trainspotting, which is an immersive production. Again, I saw it myself for the first time at the King's Head on Upper Street, and then got involved with moving that show onwards and developing it. And we are planning and hoping that we will be taking it back to the Edinburgh Fringe this August. Tickets are already on sale if you fancy planning ahead in these dark times. In the last few years we've actually been producing and presenting that show in a unique tunnel venue underneath the EICC in Edinburgh, which is the conference centre. So it's a very sort of corporate environment when you're walking around the normal parts of the building, and then our audiences are taken down into this sort of backstage tunnel, which is normally just used for storage and not really a venue. But we've been making that into a space, a theatre space, for the last few years, and we managed to make that work for an audience of 180 to enjoy the Trainspotting experience underneath the streets of Edinburgh. And that show is also toured around extensively, both in the UK and overseas. It went to have a run off Broadway in New York for 7 months, which was a production led by Scott Griffin, who also runs the Drunk Shakespeare shows in New York and Chicago now. So it's had a wonderful life, and it's also a valuable part of the King's Head's Elsewhere programme, where shows that start life at the King's Head end up playing in other places, and it's an important part of the revenue stream for the charity that productions like that contribute money back to the core operations, which are obviously at the moment the theatre on Upper Street, and hopefully going forward will be the new space that we're raising money for and developing right next door as part of the Islington Square development at also on Upper Street. So that's an outline of me and how I got into the business and what I've been doing since then. I see a question coming in here about The Crown, which was a show that we launched at the King's Head last year, and that did very well and went on to play Wilton's Music Hall and the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it's going out on a US tour later this year. We were in fact meant to be taking that on US tour next month, but for obvious reasons that's had to be rescheduled, and we're now, thanks to the quick support of the venues that we were working with, we've managed to put that tour back together. So it will be starting now in the summer in August, and then going on to venues around the US all the way through to February next year. So that show, which at the King's Head was called The Crown Jewel, and which when it's touring in the US will be called The Crown Live. That was a commission. I commissioned Dan Clarkson to write it in collaboration with the director Owen Lewis, and it was a parody of the Netflix series The Crown. When it launched at the King's Head last year, it was the first 2 series of The Crown, and Dan has actually just been rewriting it to make it relevant to all 3 series that are out now. And in fact, earlier today, I had the first time experience of organising a play reading via Skype. We were due to be having a meeting. We were actually due to be starting rehearsals this week for the US tour of The Crown. But with the changed circumstances, we've got the team together on Skype, and we managed to do a successful and productive reading of the new draft of the script, so that Dan's going to be able to do some work on that as part of preparing for the slightly delayed rehearsals for the show happening in the summer. So yeah, that's very much been what I've been doing as a producer in the last couple of weeks, is rescheduling, reorganizing things that were lined up for the next couple of months and taking them into later in the year. And if there are producers watching who want to ask questions about that process around moving things and how we're trying to be resilient in the current circumstances, then comment away and I'll talk as best I can about that. Also, I would say as an open offer that I'm very happy for people to contact me if they're having issues around the current situation, if they need advice and help on how to deal with the challenges that are presented by the sudden unexpected shutdown of our industry, which is challenging times for everyone involved. But I think both as a producer and also as a trustee of the King's Head, it's encouraging to see so much support being put together, both on a government level and also in terms of theatrical charities coming together. And there is a wonderful website that's been set up now by the Society of London Theatre, which is called theatresupport.info. So if you are working in the business and looking for support or advice about how you can keep going in these difficult times, then that website is a good place to look at as a first stop shop, as one-stop shop for resources in the industry, and I think it's wonderful the way that the theatrical charities have rallied round so quickly to put that together, and because obviously the long-term health of the theatre industry relies on us looking after our own now, and that's been very much part of the way that the King's Head Board of Trustees have approached the unfortunate but necessary closure of the venue for the time being. And as a charity, we have the responsibility for maintaining a certain level of reserves in the bank, so that if we do end up in this sort of situation, we have the means to keep paying our staff and honouring the obligations that the charity has undertaken to its people to make sure that those bills are paid and those people are looked after as this closure happens. So just to talk more generally about that role of being a charity trustee, it's the first time I've actually been on a board in that way. So it was a exciting, if terrifying, offer to come on and be chair of the board of the King's Head, and we have a great team around us, both in terms of the wonderful staff and executive team of the King's Head, led by Adam and Fiona, and also I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful group of trustees from a really wide range of backgrounds who are supporting the charity at this time and generally. I mean, the way that the board works is that we meet 4 or 5 times a year to talk about what the venue is doing and what the budgets are and what the future plans are. Obviously, a big part of the work that we're doing at the moment is connected to the capital campaign, where there's a multi-million-pound project to move the King's Head to a state-of-the-art new venue next door to the current premises. And that's been a big part of what the board have been doing in recent years. We had a great event last month in early February at Portchester Hall, which was the King's Head big birthday bash, celebrating 50 years of the venue. because it was established in 1970 by Dan Crawford, and here we are 50 years on, looking to move the venue into exciting and better equipped new premises. Because obviously one of the challenges of producing the ambitious work that Adam and his team look to put on is that the venue has limitations of being only 110 seats and basically a room in the back of a pub. So we're looking to get ready for the next 50 years of the King's Head by moving into this wonderful new venue, which will have 2 auditoria, so a main house of about 250 seats and a studio up to 80 seats, and then that's you can see the designs and more information on that in the King's Head website. So we've got some questions coming in now, which I'll start answering, and if there's any more comments or queries, then please pop them on the feed, and I'll get round to them. I see Lynn is asking about a play that she's hoping to co-produce in Edinburgh, and asking about the question of whether angels and investors will continue to fund theatre productions in the current circumstances. And it is a very valid and question to ask, because it is a really challenging time. I think the first thing to bear in mind on that is that the reason that people get into theatre investment and angel support in the first place is that they love the theatre. And so all of us who do love the theatre are obviously struggling at the moment in a time when we can't go to the theatre. Although it's wonderful to see all these initiatives coming up around ways that we can experience art, even if we are working from home and living and isolating, as many people are at the moment. So I think that really, as ever with an investment, and trying to get an investment or support from donors and investors and angels, it's a conversation. And so I think, well-established investors will understand the challenges and the risks around producing. And I think they're still very open to looking at supporting shows and new shows, but they would obviously want to understand how the producer is working with the risks that are on the table at the moment, and looking at how risks can be minimised and predict and managed in the coming months. So obviously at the moment the Edinburgh Fringe is planning to happen as normal, although the Fringe Society have announced various measures that will help companies in the event that the 2020 Fringe can't go ahead. So I think that don't give up is the first message, and make sure you're having an open conversation with your team, with your venue, with your backers about how you can move forward with the show and what approach your venue's taking to the uncertainty of the current time, and I think that sort of front-footed conversation and proactive investigation will reassure donors and investors that you're moving forward in a good way. And obviously, given the unique circumstances of that we find ourselves in at the moment, venues and suppliers and are taking a very flexible and open approach to the idea that some shows may need to be postponed. And I hope that most work that is being disrupted by this can be postponed rather than cancelled. And certainly we're fortunate enough to be in that position, both my productions as an independent producer and also for the King's Head, where we're working to retain a lot of the programming that can't go ahead as scheduled. We're looking at ways that we can ensure that does still happen and get seen by the public, because there's lots of wonderful stuff coming up in the programme. Adam and his team have put together some wonderful shows across the whole spectrum of programming, and we can't wait to get back to be able to be making that work again. And I do think actually the current situation is one where, maybe not through choice, but through the accident of where we are, it does lend itself to development of new work in the sense of writing happening, and as I was mentioning earlier, we did manage to do a play reading via Skype with the cast and creative team meeting online in a way that isn't quite the same as sitting in the same room, but actually in terms of the creative process, it was, I think, just as useful to be able to hear that script, and we're also anyway moving increasingly towards having more online ways of fulfilling certain parts of the process of putting on shows. So one of the shows that I produce and that's been touring around quite a lot in the last few years is Potted Potter, which is currently in running a season in Las Vegas. And because the creative team are based here in the UK, and we're casting actors who are based in the US, we're increasingly using self-tape and Skype-based auditions before we move forward to actually in-person kind of finals or callbacks or recalls that allow us to keep the cast, keep selecting the right people for the cast of that show. So some other questions coming in. Matt is asking me how I stress test an idea or potential productions, asking about whether it's an instinct or if looking at whether there are other ways to sense whether it has commercial appeal. Is development an important part of this process? Yes. So I think, a lot of people look at the sort of producing output that I have and say, well, what's the unifying theme here? And realistically, it is stuff that I would want to pay to go and see. And a lot of the time when I'm choosing what shows to produce, it's part of my test is around whether something like that already exists, because I don't really see the point in creating work in the image of something else. I'm always more interested in producing and developing and nurturing work that is different and new in some way. But on a commercial level, that's also about the business case of looking for gaps in the market and unique experiences. And so I do think that one of the things that sometimes people starting out in the business maybe can forget is that although it's a competitive industry, it's also, as we're seeing in recent days, an incredibly collaborative and cooperative and supportive industry. And I think one of the most important things that anyone putting a new show together, whether that's a producer or a writer or a director or an artistic director looking at a number of projects and deciding which one to go with, is to just talk to people and ask them, if we put this on, would you go and see it? How much would you want to pay for a ticket? What sort of audience do you think might come to this? Do you like this title, or would that title be better? Is this poster image the best one, or should we go for that? And I think those sorts of conversations are really important to have, rather than purely going on personal instinct. But I do think always, as a producer, it has to be. It's not. I'm not really about producing by committee. It is ultimately still my decision as a producer to put work on, and in a venue like the King's Head, it's ultimately Adam's decision as artistic director that the work will go on in the venue. So there has to, at the base of all of that sort of straw poll and asking opinions and finding out what other people think, there has to be somebody who is making that final decision. Sometimes that is an artistic director, sometimes that's a producer, sometimes that's a director. Depends on the way that the project has come about and what the show is and how it's financed. So we are coming up to the end of our time on the session. I will go on for an extra couple of minutes because there was a little bit of a delay as I wrestled with the technology to let me take over the King's Head stream today. So if there are any final questions, then please ask away. But I will just remind everybody that the King's Head Online is happening every weekday at the moment, and the next one tomorrow is a book club based around Hedda Gabler. So if you know that play or are interested in having a read of it before 1:00 tomorrow, then then you'll find that stream happening here at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And the Facebook and Instagram pages of the King's Head will continue to advertise details of other KHT online things that are happening in coming days and weeks. I'll take the final question there from Ella on Instagram, asking how you get funding for an R&D project, for a research and development project. It is possible to do that both in a commercial way in terms of raising money from investors, or in a funded way in terms of applying for finance from trusts, foundations, Arts Council, those sorts of sources. Personally, in the last example of a piece where I was co-producing an adaptation of a well-known book, we raised some money from investors, and the idea behind that is that when if the show goes ahead, then that money will go into part of the capitalisation, and they will have a return on it. But there are investors out there who will support shows on a speculative basis like that, and long-term investors understand that it makes sense to actually spend a good amount of time developing and researching new shows rather than rushing ahead into production, and regular and investors understand that's all part of the process. So I think I'm going to wrap up then and say thank you all for joining today, and stay safe, everyone. Look after yourselves, and remember the King's Head is here to support artists and audiences, and ultimately we look forward to reopening our doors before too long. And thank you all for joining today. Bye bye.